Welcome to Trash Talk Reverse. I'm Harry, and today we're going to be watching Season 2, Episode 8 of Game of Thrones. This is the precursor to Blackwater, so I expect some setup for Tyrion and Stannis, though probably not too much since they have the actual battle episode itself to flesh some of that stuff out. In the north, we might be introduced to Ramsay Bolton because he's supposed to be heading up there to deal with the Theon stuff. Given how the last episode ended, we might pick back up with the real live Bran and Rickon being totally okay. We also had the show suggesting Catelyn might have killed Jaime Lannister near the end, but we know that that doesn't actually happen, so this episode might show her setting Jaime and Brienne on their journey to King's Landing. Across the Narrow Sea, there was some nonsense with Dany's storyline, and I vaguely remember her being in episode 8, but I don't remember her actually entering the House of the Undying until episode 10. Jon, on the other hand, is entering Wildling territory. I feel like there's been a lot happening across all storylines this season, which is the opposite of how I felt last season, so without further ado, let's jump into episode 8.
Which one gave you the tougher fight, the cripple or the 6-year-old? You seized their home, as is your right. We're Ironborn, we take what we need. And you made them prisoners in their home and they ran away. Is that treachery?
She's pointing out something interesting, because obviously Theon has been in the north for almost his entire life, so his understanding of the Ironborn method is very shallow. As she's pointing out, he spent just a couple days with the Ironborn, and he got this impression that he needs to be super tough, which, in all fairness, that's exactly what his dad made it seem like. That's exactly what everyone around him made it seem like. But Yara here is showing a sort of middle ground between Theon and Balon Greyjoy, because from what we've seen so far, Balon Greyjoy is like super into the we have to take everything, we hate the Starks, blah blah blah, and that is what Theon has gleaned from him. On the other hand, Yara actually has an understanding of what it means to be Ironborn, but she's also not going to be stupid about it. And because of this, it makes Theon look even more ridiculous, because this kid grew up in Winterfell. He's shown in that scene with him, his father, and his sister, and the map, as well as the scene with that one guy right before they were setting out from the Iron Islands, that he has a good grasp on northern politics. He knows that if they do this, then Winterfell is going to do this. If they do this, the Starks are going to do this. He understands how the alliances work. He understands how the Bannermen work. He's even the one who suggested to his dad the Starks would make better allies. And his dad was like, no way. So like I said before, from Theon to go from pointing out to his dad that this aggressive Iron Islander way is not going to work, to then, I guess, cosplaying as an Iron Islander in his rash decisions is kind of a lot. And especially with Yara pointing out, like, you killed these two kids. Like, you look dumb.
You know how valuable those boys were?
I'm warning you.
Warn me.
You haven't brought enough men.
That conversation progressed a bit weird and unnaturally.
I've come to bring you home.
Winterfell is the heart of the north.
Hundreds of miles from the sea. We're islanders. Our power comes from our ships. And now that you've decorated your walls with the bodies of the Stark boys, every man in the north wants to see you hang. When Robb Stark finds out...
We won't find out. We've killed all the ravens. We have all the horses.
But Robb did find out, so clearly you were not that good at keeping your secret. Everything about this scene just makes Theon look even more dumb, because you seriously thought Robb wouldn't find out? That's why when he took over Winterfell, I was like, oh, is he not going to struggle with the fact that he's betraying Robb? And now it turns out he thinks Robb is not going to find out at all? Are you dumb, dude? Exactly what Yara is saying. He is dumb. But this stupidity just doesn't even make sense with his character. Because like I was saying, he has showed his understanding of politics in the North. And at the end of the last episode, I was concerned more with the fact that the show was trying so hard to make it look like he had killed Bran and Rickon, even though it was obvious that he wouldn't have done that, and that it was more likely that he didn't find them. But then having that carry into this episode and him not even being upfront with Yara and genuinely making it seem like he killed those two boys and not even trying to defend himself and being like, actually, I didn't kill them, I couldn't find them, so we're actually good on that end, and I can totally turn this around and tell everyone that actually those guys were not Bran and Rickon, so don't worry, you guys, I did not kill your precious Starks. I just don't know what's going through his head, because there's no logic to any of this. And I'm trying to understand why the writers went this route with Theon's character. I know that they want to be like, okay, so he's going to betray Winterfell here, and then Ramsay Bolton's going to show up and kind of turn him into Reek, and then by being essentially Ramsay Bolton's slave, Theon's going to realize how good he had it before with the Starks, and he's going to end up dying to protect Winterfell by sacrificing himself to the Night King, blah blah blah. On the surface, it doesn't look terrible, and I agree that Theon's arc should have culminated in him coming to accept Winterfell as his home and the Starks as his true family, perhaps, but not like this. Like I've been saying for a while now, I really didn't care for how the betrayal stuff was done, because it feels underdeveloped, it makes Theon look really stupid, and it kind of feels like they did this because they wanted the Boltons to gain an upper hand on Robb. They wanted to undermine the Starks even further in this overall war with the Lannisters, because obviously we know that Ramsay Bolton taking over Winterfell will lead to the Boltons having control over Winterfell and thus being able to side with the Lannisters, get rid of the Starks. I don't remember the full details on that, but obviously the Red Wedding was able to happen because of the Boltons aligning themselves with the Lannisters. And the fact that Theon's character does essentially nothing for the next several seasons is further proof that his character arc was not for the sake of his character, but for the sake of making sure that the Starks were taken down a notch in their fight against the Lannisters.
And one night you just wouldn't shut up. I wanted to strangle you, and you looked up at me and you stopped screaming. Don't die so far from the sea.
The story she tells is kind of interesting, because she's basically saying, you're annoying, but at the end of the day, you're my brother, so just listen to me and come home. But just the flow of that over overall conversation between them in that room from start to finish could have used some editing, because the way we got into that story and the way we came out of that story just did not feel natural.
He's a bastard of Winterfell, Ned Stark's son.
What does man want with a dead man's bastard?
The wildlings really be getting news like that, because how did you know that Ned Stark died? I'm kind of curious how exactly the wildlings are aware of what's going down in the south. Like, is there some sort of spy situation, or did the writers just have the wildlings know things in order to make sure Jon stays alive?
When you didn't come back, we weren't looking for you. You found your tracks fast enough. But they found us before we found you.
See, the last couple episodes I was saying, wouldn't they have realized Jon wasn't coming back and then gone to find him? So I'm glad that yes, that turned out to be the case. But again, he did not get that far, bro. Unless they're implying they waited until the next morning, because we had Jon chasing her and then catching her, and they went a very short distance before it was time to go to sleep. They're saying they set out to find Jon, but either they did it in the few minutes that it would have taken Jon to chop Ygritte's head off and come back, and in the very short time it would have taken for them to backtrack to track Jon and not find them, but get caught without Jon and Ygritte getting caught, or they waited until the next day after Jon and Ygritte had already gotten way far away, and that's when they started looking for him. Either way, y'all really just made that up, because they knew there would be no reasonable explanation for them to have gotten separated and then meet back up over here. That being said, I'm gonna just ignore it and move on, because what's done is done.
He once told me that being a lord is like being a father, except you have thousands of children. He told me he woke with fear in the morning and went to bed with fear in the night. How can a man be brave if he's afraid? That is the only time a man can be brave, he told me.
I would have preferred to have, maybe not this exact conversation, but at least something of substance between Robb and Ned in that first episode and a half before Ned goes south, because we got scenes with Ned and Jon and Ned and Bran, and a very short thing with Robb and Jon, but we didn't really get anything with Ned and Robb. Maybe that was like a very early foreshadowing that Robb's journey is not going to get that far, so they were probably like, why bother giving him those scenes anyway? Because all the surviving kids do get one-on-one time with Ned. But either way, I've been saying this all throughout the season, that I feel like the first episode and a half was missing some crucial relationship scenes between Robb and his family, like Robb and Arya, and now of course Robb and Ned.
Most lords worry more about their gold and their glory than the charwoman scrubbing their floors. And you?
You think I'm fighting this war so they'll sing songs about me? I want the men following me to go home.
And why don't you?
Because we'll never be safe until the Lannisters are defeated.
Chopping off Joffrey's head.
That would be a start.
That conversation took a weird turn. He got real defensive there. He was like, you think I'm fighting this war so people will sing songs about me? Like, she did not suggest that. She just asked, what about you? I feel like they only did that to transition the conversation into this. And then for her to be like, then why don't you go home? Just a few episodes ago, Robb told you they're fighting this war because Joffrey's a bad king. So why are they just rehashing this?
Why?
For the girls.
So now Catelyn's back with the, I did it for the girls. And remember last episode I was saying they framed it to make it look like she did it to keep peace in the camp. Just the way they executed that was really not well done, and it undermined Catelyn doing this. Also, I thought we were going to pick up with Catelyn sending them off, but I guess we're cutting right to Robb coming back and confronting her about it. I think we really missed out on seeing the look on Jaime's face when Catelyn freed him instead of killing him. Like, I don't think they should have skipped over that.
Have you known many men, women, horses? No crimes are past forgiveness, Kingslayer. Why do you hate me so much? Have I ever harmed you?
That's a weird thing to ask. Why would he ask the knight who's loyal to Catelyn Stark about why she would dislike him? Not to mention you've been insulting her these past 2 episodes. Like, why are these conversations written in such weird ways in order to get characters to give information that would otherwise not have come about organically in the dialogue?
Has anyone ever told you you're as boring as you are ugly?
That's a lot coming from Jaime, who was boring me to tears last episode in that conversation with the cousin. I very much despised that whole scene.
Whereas Robb Stark remains north of Ashmark.
That guy was the Mountain, right? Who I was shocked to find out even spoke. It's so weird the way he was established in season 1 and seeing him now just chilling at the table on Tywin's war council.
I want a full night's march before he knows we're on the move.
And now it's time to get out of here.
Trusting a traitor bastard!
Dang, even Qhorin Halfhand got the tea on the South. I guess when he met up with the Castle Black excursion, they filled him in. But I'm kind of curious about what the conversation would have looked like if Jon and Qhorin Halfhand had talked about his father.
Do you have to do that here?
I like to keep my hands clean.
That was a weird way to start the conversation. Who cares about his nails?
And wearing a gold cloak wasn't part of it.
Fine. What? Why are you staring at me?
You don't want me cleaning my nails? You don't want me looking your way? Why am I here?
To help me. An History of the Great Sieges of Westeros by Archmaster Sheblethan.
This conversation is coming about so inorganically.
The gold cloak's performance these last few weeks.
And how did you accomplish this mock drop in thievery?
Have you ever been in a city under siege? See, it's not the fighting that kills most people. It's the starving. The thieves, they steal all the food.
See, that was a lot more interesting. They should have started the scene with all 3 of them coming in to meet here, or maybe Varys and Bronn coming into this room to meet with Tyrion, who's looking through books, and then start with the thief stuff. We didn't need all that crap earlier. That felt like it was just really, really bad dialogue in order to get into the scene. Like, we don't need that. Just get into the scene.
I'm not cut out for this sort of work.
I can't imagine anything much worse.
Where do you think John is right now?
He went off with a half hand. A betting man would go with dead.
John's a great fighter.
Well, he's better than me. A lot better than you.
What Seven hours that.
Okay, finally something interesting, because that conversation, many of the conversations in this episode feel like they're crafted just to pass the time. It's natural for Sam to be worrying about Jon and even about Qhorin Halfhand, but the actual dialogue and the way the scene unfolded wasn't good. It's like they were thinking, okay, we need to have them talk about this, so let's just have them talk about this, but not think about how we're going to craft the dialogue, because we essentially need to cover this topic and move on.
How long after I give you the name does it take you to kill someone?
A minute, a month.
I need him dead right now.
This a man cannot do.
A lot of people talk about, is it a plot hole that Arya doesn't name Joffrey, Cersei, Tywin? And it's good that they have this scene right here to establish some of the rules, because even if she had named them, who knew how long that would take? Who knew when that would happen? And how would she know that it had happened? So it makes sense for her to have targeted the torture guy, because he was like a more immediate target, and the second name, obviously he was an immediate threat to her. So it makes sense that she would put him up. Now the way all of that unfolded was overly manufactured, but since it did, it makes sense for Arya to have used that as her second name. And clearly in this scene you can see she wanted to use Tywin as the third name, but it just isn't reasonable.
Jack and Hagar.
Hagar gives a man his own name. This is no joking thing.
I'm not joking. A man can go kill himself.
I'm dying. A man can go kill himself.
If you help me and my friends escape.
This would require more than one life. This is not part of our bargain.
Fine, Jack and Hagar.
A girl lacks honor.
She's like, try me, bitch.
Odd little boy. I have a certain sympathy for odd little boys.
You and Varys both.
Excellent lamprey pie.
Again, why are all these scenes starting with such random ass dialogue that literally doesn't matter? It doesn't craft character. It's not good. Like for Tyrion to be talking about the pie, and then for Cersei to come in with something that isn't related. Why not just start the scene with Cersei saying, I hear Joffrey wants to fight? There are, of course, scenes where you can have more of a lead up, and there are scenes where that can be done well or done poorly. It feels like the scenes in these episodes, not only are they done poorly, but they're not needed to begin with.
He's not ready.
What is it, 17? Remember Jaime at 17?
Some men have a gift for this sort of thing. His place is not on the battlefield.
It's not on the throne either.
I feel like in addition to bringing up Jaime, he could have also brought up Robb Stark, who is slightly older, and then Cersei could come in with the some people have a place on the battlefield, etc.
And now you want to send my eldest son to the battlefield to die.
Have his king's guard protecting him. The men will fight more fiercely seeing their king fighting beside them, instead of hiding behind his mother's skirts.
Do you know why Varys is so dangerous? Because he doesn't have a cock. You, on the other hand, that little worm between your legs, does half your thinking.
It's not that little.
Again, you see how unnaturally this conversation is progressing. She just said out of nowhere, do you know why Varys is dangerous? This dude had nothing to do with the conversation, bro. It's like they wrote out the points that each of the characters needed to make, and then in order to connect them, they just came up with a bunch of really random bits of dialogue.
Because I'm happy.
Why are you happy?
Because I have your little whore.
So I kind of wish we'd gotten a scene of Cersei finding out, which then transitions into this conversation. Because again, it feels like they're skipping stuff that we should have seen. Like we skipped Catelyn setting Jaime free and sending him with Brienne, and now this.
Shae!
Maybe shut the door before you scream her name?
I would kill for you. You know that.
I mean, technically,
Promise me.
I honestly don't buy that Tyrion would be this head over heels for Shae. I didn't buy it last season, and I don't buy it this season. Like I said back in episode 2 when Varys found her, she feels more like a plot point or an obstacle for Tyrion to navigate. Like, why do you love her this bad? We don't really understand why. We see that she matters enough for him to bring her to King's Landing and for him to be desperate to keep her safe, but why did he fall in love with her? That's something they didn't really show last season. We met her, and they had some conversations that were kind of whatever, and that's pretty much it. Isn't this the scene where they get steamy?
I've had to arrest my mother. The Lannisters have my sisters. The man I considered my closest friend has seized my home and my brothers. I'm fighting a war and I don't know if I should march south or north.
Sorry.
Yeah, it seems a lot like the writers are constantly throwing obstacles in your path to make things easier for everyone else.
You're being kind. I have no rights.
Yeah, very right.
This is like the reverse of what we saw before.
When I was 12, mother and father went to a wedding, and they left me with my little brother. The second afternoon they were gone. I was treading water when I realized I hadn't seen my brother.
I really don't find this story interesting at all. I know Robb's like super captivated. I'm just not liking the dialogue in this scene. And I feel like the 4 scenes they've had have kind of gone back and forth. The first scene felt more combative, and then the second scene, Talisa was literally blushing like a schoolgirl, and so was he. And their third scene was very formal. And then their fourth scene, it was Robb talking about his backstory, which suddenly turned very combative. And now we have this scene where Robb was a bit combative, but then she was immediately like, oh, sorry. And he was like, no, I'm sorry. And now we're getting her backstory. Like out of all these scenes, only the third one was well done. And the first one maybe to an extent, but the other scenes have just felt like the writers trying to inorganically force these two to get to know each other.
I would not waste my years planning dances and masquerades with the other noble ladies. I would never live in a slave city again. I blathered
I
on.
don't want to marry the Frey girl.
Oh, brother. Y'all have known each other 2 days. Not literally 2 days, but he fell in love with her so fast. Like, I did not realize he decided he wanted to marry her in this season. When we met her, I was like, okay, I guess their romance is gonna develop over the course of this season and maybe a little bit of next, and then they're gonna decide to marry. But he met this girl 4 episodes ago. Earlier in this episode, he's talking about how the bridge is absolutely essential and he has to marry this girl. And now he's in love with her after one story. Like, that's really all it took for you to be like, I want to marry marry her. Not even, oh, I really want her. For him to be interested in her makes sense. For him to jump to like, I need to marry you, like that's crazy.
I admire you, Sir Davos. Some high-born fools call you Onion Knight and think they insult you. Do you take the onion for your sigil? You defend these men who insult you behind your back. Robert and Ned Stark, they were the heroes, liberating towns from the yoke of the Mad King while I held Storm's End with 500 men. He gave Storm's End to Renly after the war. Renly never fought a day in his life. First we ate the horses, never liked cats, so fine. I do like dogs, and then you made it through the lines. Because Robert was my older brother and he was the king and I've always done my duty. And when I sit the Iron Throne, you'll be my hand. I expect you'll be the first Crabber's son to wear the badge.
Now the exposition that Stannis gave in this scene was very interesting, very well told, very captivating. From the content of the conversation to the context in which it was brought up to the dialogue, this is what all the other conversations in this episode should have done. The way they entered the conversation, the way it flowed, the way the story came into the picture, and even though it was a long story, it was still well told. He was talking about we had to eat the horses, we had to eat the cats. It could have felt boring, but it just wasn't. And then he gets to the point of relevancy, which is about Davos coming in to save them, then transitioning back into how he had to give up Storm's End, and now he's the rightful king, and then finally getting to the crux of the scene about making Davos his hand, which ties in with how the conversation started, which was about him being the Onion Knight and all these people looking down on Davos and how they won't do that anymore.
They say Stannis never smiles. I'll give him a red smile.
Imagine Stannis' terror. You're an intelligent man. I'd like to think I'm an intelligent man. What do you want? My brother was the youngest King's Guard in history. His sister became queen at the age of 19. When I reached manhood, my father put me in charge of all the drains and cisterns in Casterly Rock. So when my father named me acting hand...
You're quite good at being hand, you know. Jon Arryn and Ned Stark were good men, but they disdained the game and those who played. You enjoy the game.
Stannis breaches the gates, the game is over.
This conversation is progressing in such a strange manner. First we had Joffrey being like, basically I'll kill Stannis if he shows up. And then instead of reflecting on that, Tyrion's like, I'm intelligent, you're intelligent, let's be intelligent together, which is the weirdest transition in the world for Tyrion to talk about how his entire family, everyone was very young when they got their essential roles to play. And I thought this was going to go in the direction of them being like, Joffrey's basically now that age, and because he's so stupid, I'm going to have to fix this for him. But then they went in the direction of being like, I'm Hand of the King, Jon Arryn and Ned Stark were Hands of the King, I like the Game of Thrones, and if Stannis shows up, the game ends. Like, what are you talking about, dude? Why is this conversation written so weird?
The Lord of Light wants his enemies burnt. The drowned god wants them drowned. Where's the god of tits and wine?
And now we're talking about religion.
In the Summer Isles, fertility goddess with 16 teats. I heard a song. All the way from Karth, Daenerys Targaryen lives.
Am I to assume they did all of this meandering BS to get to Varys talking about the Summer Isles and then transition into talking about Dany? Like, you cannot be serious. I know for a fact there's a better way to have written this conversation with much better flow, much better dialogue, and much better overall scene structure.
But even if what they say is true, it'll be years before they are fully grown.
One game at a time, my friend.
I can't even appreciate this transition because of how badly that scene was crafted. Like, yes, you talked about Dany and now we cut to Dany, but the mental gymnastics they had to play in order to get from what Joffrey was talking about to now Dany is ludicrous.
They have my dragons. Mother does not flee without her children.
If we stay in Karth, we'll die.
I understand Jorah's urgency, but you don't think that the people in Karth having her dragons could potentially do some serious damage in the future? On what planet would she leave without them?
And they are the only children I will ever have. Take me to them.
Again, like I was saying last episode, if Theon had actually killed Bran and Rickon, then it would have been a misstep for the show to not show that. Not the actual killing, of course, but at least the capturing them and bringing them back to Winterfell part. And this scene still would have worked as a reveal from Maester Luwin.
Bran would blame himself.
They'll never hear it from me.
They just didn't end that scene on a more poignant note. Anyway, I really did not like that episode. Most of the scenes had such bad dialogue, flow, and scene structure, and some of the content wasn't so great either. I'm kind of baffled by how bad this episode was. Like, I don't even know where to start, and I've legit been sitting here for almost 4 hours. That's how long it took to get through this episode, and then try to collect my thoughts afterwards. So by the time I finish recording this, it will have been over 4 hours. This episode felt like an unedited first draft where they were trying to cram in some plot points and talking points really quickly, but also added in some really random stuff because they thought they wouldn't have enough relevant bits to fill their space, even though they skipped some scenes that could have been good to show, like Catelyn releasing Jaime. Also, I would have much rather seen Bran and Rickon get away from Theon instead of just having it summarized for us after a fake out death. Hell, I'd rather have them leave altogether and head farther away, rather than doubling back, and maybe later on Maester Luwin could meet up with them somehow, so they could learn about the Three-Eyed Raven and get kickstarted on that storyline. Instead, what we got was really poorly done and felt like a needless waste of time. Theon wouldn't have been in such bad shape if he hadn't pretended to kill the boys. Like, I really really can't fathom why he would do that. No one knew they were missing except some guards. If he wanted Maester Luwin to, I guess, behave himself, he could have presented the corpses to him specifically and nobody else. And then more generally to the rest of Winterfell, he could have pretended he still had the Stark boys. Having grown up in Winterfell, he of all people should know how much the North values the Starks. I think the conversation with Yara still would have worked if he hadn't pretended to kill them, and Yara was instead grilling him about, you really lost the Stark boys? Like, just come home at this point. And yeah, it makes sense he wouldn't want to go home now after all this effort because his dad's just gonna yell at him for being stupid. But without Yara's support, what exactly is the plan? Like, he literally has no choice but to go home. Or am I really supposed to believe that he somehow believes Robb Stark would never find out and that he can just chill here until what? His plan was to take Winterfell and then have Yara show up and help him. Since Yara won't help him, the plan is screwed and he should just go home. But of course, that's not in the cards because the writers only had him do this to create conflict without them having to actually develop that conflict. This is why we didn't have Theon struggle with the idea of betraying Robb. It's why there was no instance of Theon feeling ostracized by the Starks, apart from that one super inorganic and poorly written scene of Robb chastising him in season 1. It's why he didn't think to take any other stronghold to impress his father and win over his crew. It's why Theon magically forgot that the Iron Islands were inconvenient conveniently super far away for Yara to even give him proper support. We know that back in like episode 3, in that scene with his father and Yara and the map, he was showing some of that political prowess there, but in episode 5, he basically figured out he'd be able to take Winterfell if he did this and this and this. That makes sense that he would know these things and have this sort of understanding as somebody who grew up in Winterfell and understands how the loyalties in that area work. But from my perspective, as someone watching this rather than living in the world, I had no idea where all these locations were. I didn't know how far the Iron Islands were from Winterfell until Yara pointed it out this episode. All I remembered was that she wasn't able to help, but I didn't remember why until now. And it makes sense. Like, of course she wouldn't be able to provide land support from hundreds of miles away when her sailors are busy doing other stuff. And if Yara knows that, did Theon really not know that? Of course, having Theon take over Winterfell is an interesting prospect in and of itself, considering that he grew up here. But when you don't take the time to develop why, and you instead try to have your cake and eat it too by showing he knows enough about the landscape to know how to take Winterfell, but not enough to know that he's too far away to keep it, it feels like this plot point only exists because the writers needed to give the Boltons an easy way to take charge of the North. Which, by the way, Ramsay's still not here. I guess we'll see him in episode 10, or maybe not even until the next season if they didn't want to cast the actor for just one episode. Now, Robb, on the other hand, is also dealing with some BS from the writers because he fell in love with Lady Talisa in literally 2 seconds. And his mother freed Jaime Lannister, which, as I talked about in the last episode, had been framed as her doing it to keep the peace in the camp, even though now she's suddenly back to, oh, it was for the girls, despite last episode not having development on that end. So the problems of last episode have now bled into this one, including that god-awful scene of Brienne and Jaime on the run. I just really hate the way they executed Catelyn's conflict after setting it up so well. Like, if she was gonna end up freeing him and saying it was for the daughters, last episode shouldn't have had all that BS about Jaime killing his cousin and killing the other guy to get free and forcing Catelyn's hand to deal with the situation to keep peace in the camp. Like, all of that was such nonsense. And now that they've sent away their Lannister leverage, I'm curious to see how Catelyn and Robb convince themselves that the Freys won't be pissed at Robb for not wanting to marry Walder Frey's daughter. And speaking of the Lannisters, what exactly was the purpose of writing in this fake leverage Cersei thinks she has on Tyrion? Was this just to hit home the importance of Shae not being discovered? For Cersei to get Tyrion to guarantee Joffrey's safety? I would rather Cersei have no leverage, real or fake, and get back to one of those very genuine conversations like they had in the last episode. There's no need to make up this fake conflict in order to amp up the tension between them again after Tyrion almost comforted her in their last exchange. And no need to try and make the audience think that Cersei had Shae either. Just have them talk battle strategies. Obviously, Tyrion's not going to give up the fact that he knows about the wildfire, and obviously Cersei's not going to tell him, but have him at least ask her what the plan is. And Cersei's aim in the conversation is to figure out how to guarantee Joffrey's safety. Like, I know last episode she was talking about one day I'm going to take somebody you love from you after he sent Myrcella away, and then they had that really nice conversation, and now she's bringing it up again, I found someone you love and I'm going to take her away from you. Instead of all that BS, Tyrion should have brought up, you're concerned for Joffrey's safety, but you're mad that I sent Myrcella away from where the battle is about to be, and then have the rest of the discussion revolve around getting Joffrey to listen to her and stay back. I think their conversation in the last episode was enough for Tyrion to now express that he understands where she's coming from and that he'll try his best to keep Joffrey safe. And I think it would make sense for her to genuinely believe that. Why would she assume that Tyrion wants to get rid of her kids to screw her over? Like, obviously their relationship this season has been very tenuous, but from Cersei's point of view, there should be no reason for Tyrion to want to get Joffrey killed on the battlefield, because that would screw the Lannisters. Like, he'd literally be screwing himself if he did that. Because who would be the king then? Tommen? Stannis Baratheon? Like, it makes no sense why Cersei would be that threatened written by Tyrion in order to threaten him to make sure he guarantees Joffrey's safety. And even though in this scene, Tyrion said Joffrey being on the front lines would help with the army spirits, it would also make sense for Tyrion to then acknowledge through their conversation that this would prevent him from making sure Joffrey wouldn't do anything stupid. So again, the conflict exists. There's no need to reach for it in ridiculous places. And this could then tie in later with the conversation he has with Joffrey and Varys, which also needed some massive improvement. Their conversation could have been more about keeping Joffrey at bay and prepping for Stannis, and they really didn't need to bring up Dany there. She didn't even need to be in this episode since it was only one really short scene. And that scene we got of her makes a lot more sense contextually if it's in the same episode as her getting the dragons back, because she ends the scene with "Take me to my dragons," and if that was in the same episode as her then going to the House of the Undying, it just flows a lot better. Now, Jon being in this episode actually did make sense. We got a decent amount of the North of the Wall stuff, and most of that was written pretty well. They cut away from that scene of Sam and the others so quickly that maybe it would have been better to place that scene in the episode where they inevitably build upon the thing that they found. And then we have the Arya stuff, which as usual for this season was nearly flawless. I don't remember exactly where she goes from here. I know that the last episode of the season is titled Valar Morghulis, and I vaguely remember Jack and Hagar giving her the Bravos coin, changing his face, and going away. I would have to assume that season 3 is her trying to meet up with Robb and her mom since she just heard about where he is. And I think she's like right outside when the Red Wedding happens, right? The Stannis and Davos scene was also well done, and it sets an interesting stage for the next episode. Though again, I think the fact that we all like Tyrion so much and we really don't like Stannis makes Blackwater a lot less interesting than if Tyrion was facing Robb and Renly, especially with the Lannisters having Sansa. But what's done is done, and now we're about to see Stannis and Tyrion face off. So with that, I will see you in the next one.